Hey, CJN podcast listeners, Michael Freeman here, executive producer. I wanted to share that the CJN has earned 6 Simon Rockhour Awards this month, the Jewish Pulitzers, as some folks call them. We took home awards for magazine writing and design, and for feature stories on a Holocaust music project, BDS on Canadian campuses, and 4 women who discovered they were sisters in their golden years, thanks to 23andMe. But we can't create award-winning journalism without your help. If you value independent Jewish journalism, please consider supporting us today at thecjn.ca/donate.
Last week, a fire ripped through the AgriStar kosher meat packing plant in Postville, Iowa, causing significant damage. As one of the largest kosher meat processors in North America, there is a real threat of meat being in short supply for the upcoming holiday season. We wanted to take this moment then to reflect on the complicated relationship that Jews sometimes have with meat. There are vegan Jews as well as omnivore Jews, and each come in a variety of levels of stridency about their relative positions. What is it about meat that has made itself so central to the Jewish food experience? Stay tuned as we discuss the high-stakes world of meat in Judaism. I'm Avi Feingold, Matthew Leibel is still away, but Yedida Eisenstadt is here, and together we are not in heaven. Yedida, so glad to be back with you here.
Yeah, good to see you also. It's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah, missing Matthew, but we understand you're away. You got busy stuff to do. Yedida, how have you been?
Good. I've taken up bedazzling a little bit. I didn't know that my kids got into the gem art, and I did a little bit also doing it with them, trying to do and create with them rather than just watch something with them. And I didn't know you could buy these separate kits of thousands and thousands of little gems that come with this super glue, and you can bedazzle so many things.
I'm aware. I have teenage girls. Do you guys have the same problem that so many of these gem art projects get started, but then they don't get finished? And they're stuck perpetually in 25% completion mode?
Not so much. I actually have been working on a Jewish Women's Archive hot cup, and it has cat eye glasses, and I'm sort of doing a grown-up bedazzle that I am going to finish. I just have one more blue lens to fill in.
I get offers to bedazzle various things that are mine, and I'm like, no, thank you.
Yeah, Phil wishes that he might have vetoed. He got a Maharat hot cup that he had claimed as his own, but if anything needs to be bedazzled, a Maharat hot cup. So
yeah.
So I think I've now co-opted that particular hot cup. But no, there's so many things, so much creativity, so much sparkle. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. I took an extended road trip. I drove to New York to pick up our one kid. 2 kids are still in camp. And I got to see, I have to say the highlight was I got to see the Ohio State Fair, which was an eye-opener to say the least, and not just seeing piglets being born and every possible thing deep fried. But it was a good slice of America.
Tell me the most interesting experience you had at the Ohio State Fair, and I'll tell you about a couple of years ago what we went to at the Maryland State Fair on this Canadian podcast.
So I mentioned the piglets being born in front of my eyes, and that was something. And then later on, seeing grown pigs racing, they have hog racing as this thing that they do. The real eye opener was realizing that even though there are all these animal competitions, right? The best this and the most that, you're seeing llamas competing for whatever, and sheep and cows. But there was such a dichotomy between that part of the state fair and the part of the state fair that was rides and food. It felt like the two were completely separate and different. I did see in one of the big fair areas with a lot of different booths, there was an individual selling a lot of Judaica, but also with a big sign that said, "Jesus made me kosher." I resisted the temptation to go up to him, and I'm like, I knew he was the Mashiach. I didn't realize he was also the Mashgiach. But
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
But the state fair was exactly what you would imagine from a state fair. Tell me about the Maryland State Fair.
Just a few years ago, we got tickets to see monster trucks. And that also felt like quite an experience. It was very cool. The kids were really into it. Like I hadn't, when you watch the YouTubes or you see it watching Blippi, and the other parents of young children will know what I'm talking about, right? Like you're not like inhaling the gas and getting sprayed by the mud and listening to the national anthem. Anyway, it was a cultural experience.
I only learnt about the existence of Blippi at the Ohio State Fair because he was performing that night. Oh. And because I don't have young children anymore, there was no reason to go.
We would have had tickets. But one of the developments just in the last few days is my youngest has been throwing minor tantrums, demanding bacon. But I don't want real bacon. I want kosher bacon, which to us is really Morningstar Farms bacon.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah, as soon as he said kosher, it meant, was it the veggie bacon that is designed to look like it? Or is it the beef fry that is designed and smoked and cured as if it was bacon?
Right. No, so we don't have meat in our kitchen. So my poor kids will only know from the poor vegetarian alternatives.
That brings us to actually a great segue for our actual topic. So let's move on to our topic for today, which stems from the fact that there was a news story last week that in Postville, Iowa, the AgriStar meat processing plant had a fire, and 3/4 of the building or the buildings were now seriously damaged. It was accidental. But AgriStar is one of the, if not the largest kosher meat processing plants in North America, and people are saying that it is going to make for a significant problem and price hikes and shortages in the upcoming high holidays, season where everybody needs a brisket for Rosh Hashanah, and Sukkot is a week's worth of stuff. And I didn't want to talk about, meat versus vegetarianism versus veganism. I really wanted to talk about the fact that meat has become a very big cultural signifier within the Jewish community, whether you're religious or not, but especially within the observant communities who keep kosher. Meat seems to have had this valence now that we either have it as the most elevated and exalted thing, and there are people who really care about meat a lot, versus the people who are militantly vegan. And then there's people in the middle. And so much other kosher stuff has been integrated into like all the other foodways that we have. So you just look for a kosher symbol, and for most other stuff, you're basically buying whatever's available from Trader Joe's or from, Sobeys. Like they have a big kosher section, and there's a kosher bakery, and there's all this stuff. But meat requires us going to a kosher meat store for, more often than not, or going to the one corner at Costco that has the kosher like beef section or the kosher chicken. And I don't know. I want to ask ourselves, what does it mean that the Jewish community has such a relationship with meat?
I don't know that I have like insight into the deeper meaning, but one thing that I was curious about, where have you most observed this like Jewish meat culture? Like which parts of your life, in which chapters, and which venues have you encountered it most strongly?
In yeshiva, meat is a big deal. Like when they're serving meat for dinner or something, that's like, oh, it's a great night. We're going to have meat, And conversely, there's also the people who have like fleisch phobia. They don't want to have like meat in case they encounter like, some ice cream later on. My niece was telling me about this the other day, which is kind of cute. So in that sense, like at the superficial level, it was growing up in my teens and early 20s and in the mainly Orthodox communities. But as I grew up, I started seeing, and I was in my 20s really involved with chazon, dealing with food and food cultures, and not necessarily being vegan, but being sustainable and thinking about all of those things. And meat was an important and interesting part of that culture. So I started seeing right away two different parallel paths, both the path of people who are conscious about meat, not necessarily saying that they weren't going to eat meat, but they wanted to be conscious about it. And I have a great story about that I can share in a bit. And then conversely, like I'd see people who were like having Fleisch Fest, and they were like, oh, it's Parshat Noach, right? This is the Shabbat when in the Torah we were allowed to get, God gave us permission to allow to eat meat. That's a famous midrash when, Noach left the ark, and therefore we're going to have a big Shabbat dinner and everything on the menu has to have meat in it, from the challah that is like studded with chunks of salami to like the way that like a raisin challah would be, all the way to like a mincemeat pie for dessert. So like everything was there. And I was like, oh, there are people who really have turned this into like a quasi like identity. And there are people who, as we know, have turned into an identity often in the other direction. Mm-hmm. So that's really how I started thinking about like my relationship to meat.
I think first really encountered this like hardcore, I would say almost gluttonous meat culture at camp when I was staff, because we would have our all staff meetings on Saturday night. And then when the meeting was over, usually like well after midnight, there would be ribs. And ribs was like not a big thing that I grew up with. And as the camp staff grew, that became less sustainable. And then it went down to every other week. But there was this like culture, like we're going to eat meat off the bone in the middle of the night. And we're going to wake up and we're still going to be fleshek. And like, in retrospect, I have different thoughts about this, but I was, fine with it and game for the ride at the time. But I eventually also in my 20s came to learn more about Jewish, vegan, and vegetarian sort of movements and the ethics that underlay those. Anyway, I at that point wasn't a huge meat eater, and I still have not declared myself vegetarian. I just don't eat very much meat. So there was that. And then for the same summer camp one summer, I knew I was going to be teaching about the laws around shechita, around kosher slaughter, and also koshering meat with campers. So I got permission because of my Toronto restaurant hookups from the COR to go take a tour basically of the kosher chicken slaughterhouse in downtown Toronto, which I'm not even sure if it still exists. Do you know?
The one downtown? No, I don't think so.
Anyway, I wish I'd known to wear rain boots, but but it was really interesting, and I saw it up close, and I still think everybody should have a close encounter, right? Like if you are choosing to eat this, benefit from this, you should see where it comes from. And I think that is a big part and should be a big part of the conversation. And then when I was working at Pearlstone one summer, which is the Jewish farm near Baltimore, they brought out a shochet to slaughter 5 goats in advance of a wedding. And I got to see that up close. And I had a halachic man moment where he was like showing us the inside of the animal stomachs. And it was exactly as the Mishnah describes it. It was super cool. But you could hear the animal, like I don't know if they know what's about to happen to them, but they definitely were expressing some fear, anxiety, displeasure. I
was at the other big Jewish farm, right, at Isabel Friedman. For a while, for several years, they were having a conference on Jews and food co-sponsored with Chazon. And I was at the first conference that they had on Jews and food. And they had a whole discussion that on Thursday evening, that Friday morning, they were going to slaughter a goat and they were going to serve that goat Friday night as like part of Shabbat dinner. And if you wanted to go to the slaughtering, you had to go to the pre-discussion with the shochet Thursday night so that you knew what was going on. But I remember that after dinner, we were having this big group conversation, like with the whole several hundred people that were there. And Nigel Savage, who was the head of Chazon at the time, asked people to raise their hands if they were the types of vegans who were basically saying, look, I need to be able to see an ethical version of slaughter of meat in order for me to want to eat it. I'm not necessarily opposed to it on health grounds, on all moral grounds. I don't think that all meat is okay, is a problem. But if I think that meat is being produced in an ethical manner and in a humane manner, I'm going to eat it. How many of you actually put your money where your mouth is and ate dinner tonight and had some of that goat shawarma that they served? And it was a nice handful of people, probably 10, 20 people, raised their hands. And then he right away asked the reverse question, which was how many people are typical meat eaters? And this was your first experience with slaughter. And you're like, I cannot eat this right now because I saw this alive this morning. And an equal number of hands went up.
Oh, I was wondering if it was going to be actually way more hands went up. Right. So I think that this gets to a lot of the questions of what kashrut is really about. And I'm always hesitant to try to like get into the reasoning behind mitzvot, but I think that we could probably agree that keeping kosher requires a level of awareness and intentionality, consciousness of what's in your food and where it's coming from, and to some extent, like the extent of all the chemicals and processing in your food. But so, Avi, like, do you eat meat? How do you think about it? Are you like a huge meat eater, or like you put yourself somewhere in the middle? Like, what do you think about this?
I'm not a huge meat eater. I'm probably more of a meat eater now that I'm in the States, and it's actually a lot easier to obtain and a lot less expensive than it was in Montreal. I don't, gorge on meat. I'm not one of these, like, I'm going to have a 24-ounce steak every night for dinner. I do enjoy really not, well, I was going to say well cooked, but a rare steak, well prepared. And I am conscious of it. I'm always trying to think of those things. Like, for example, one of the things that I'll do is I try whenever I can to serve whole chickens at Friday night dinner if I'm serving chicken instead of just parts, because I want the guests, but especially my kids, to be aware that this looks like a bird. This is what it was. And you should, think about that. And I have heard enough. I've interviewed shochtim about the practices, and it's hard to say, oh, everything was done lovingly and with care. I'll give you a guess. How many chickens do you think the average, like Empire or Aaron's or AgriStar, how many chickens they process per minute as a shochet? Like, if you're a shochet, how many you're supposed to be able to shecht?
Oh, like a lot. It's quick. I've seen it.
Yeah.
It's super quick.
It's 20 a minute. So it's 1 every 3 seconds. You're supposed to be able to, and they have multiple shochtim that are working and checking and, doing the knives because they have to be able to do that. Yeah. So on the one hand, it's hard to say that like, oh, it's super ethical and everything's done with care, even though there is great meat that is available like that, like places like Grow and Behold and other places like that. But it's very expensive when you start getting to meat like that. So I try to make a balance between saying I'm going to eat less. I'm going to try to eat the better stuff whenever I can. And I'm going to try to be conscious and thoughtful of the meat when I'm eating it. So that's really my approach to thinking about the meat eating.
There was an episode of This American Life a long time ago where I think the first 5-minute opening clip was about a kid maybe raising an animal and then like thinking about it. It was a short story. It was something that really drove home for me that the way that we eat meat today is totally not at all even remotely how people would have raised their own meat and cared for those animals for months or years before taking them to be slaughtered, either as part of some sacrificial process or like that's an animal that you raised and had a relationship with that you are now deciding to eat. And that is like, we are so removed from meat production today.
Refrigeration has changed everything.
Yes.
And I mean, amongst many, many, many other things, I think about the fact that one of the reasons why culturally, especially Ashkenazi Judaism, is very meat heavy is because meat was a lot cheaper to produce in Eastern Europe than a vegetable or grain or plant-based diet, because you can fatten a few cows and a few goats in the leading up to the winter, and then slaughter them, butcher them, and then have the ability to like maintain that through the winter. And that becomes a lot easier to hold on to and maintain. And it's just meat was in general. Cows were very available and very easy to shecht, and it was cheaper, and that just became a big part of the diet. And it was much heavier and easier to fill up on, so to speak, than in other cultures where grain is a lot more readily available and a lot harder to get to meat. And that is really baked into our cultural life as Jews, especially Ashkenazi Jews. If you look at deli food, it's very meat heavy, right? There's a lot of cured meats. There's a lot of, it's not like vegetable soups, it's chicken soup. It's, that is where we are at. And so to deny that and to say, well, it's so much better to live a plant-based diet and everything is like the better thing. I kind of agree with the people that are like, stop being so militant, stop telling me that what I'm doing is the worst thing in the world and horrible.
Right. So I think that this gets to sort of like an everything in moderation kind of attitude, right? Now that we know that meat is produced in mass quantities without the compassion and awareness of trying not to make the animal suffers, though I'm not like, I think that those are separate mitzvot than like the strict laws of kashrut, and maybe we'll talk about that. But if kashrut and the laws around eating meat are to cultivate our humanity and our compassion, the way that we're eating meat now, I think, does not do that, right? We're so removed from the process. We're not raising those animals. We're, all you have to do is throw it on the barbecue. And I think that is in some ways antithetical to what the Torah is allowing us to do by eating meat. At the same time, like, I don't think that requires somebody to be a quote unquote militant vegan, right? Like, there is that something in between of the ethically raised meat. And I will, for the folks listening at home, yes, once in a while, I do absolutely indulge in a fabulous something. We don't cook meat in our kitchen, but I am an undeclared vegetarian for the times when it feels like my body needs it. So I think moderation is fine, but I think that where we're at now with hardcore meat culture, which is like allowed by the Torah, right? Like the halacha allows it, but the argument that the way that we produce meat now is antithetical to the compassion that the Torah is allowing resonates for me.
I hear that.
There's no mitzvah of eating meat, right? It's a permission granted.
Yeah, and there are people who really misunderstand that, right? Especially in the Haredi culture. You hear this like, oh, ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin, right? There's no joy, no celebratory meal unless there is meat and wine. And that it's considered that is the only way in which you have an elevated meal. You can't possibly have a really, really fancy elevated dairy dinner or parve dinner. God forbid. Like, if you're going to have something, you have to have meat. I remember our wedding. My wife wanted a really a parve or dairy meal. She thought it was great. And it was like a Sunday afternoon. There's no reason to really get heavy. And my mom vetoed that one hard. She was like, no, it's a simcha. We have to have meat. And we ended up serving chicken. But like, that's a big, part of a lot of people's understanding. But it's not a mitzvah. It's just a rabbinic statement. There's no like violation if you don't have meat on Shabbos or 2 pieces of fish or whatever it might be.
My husband is a quasi-declared vegetarian. He is vegetarian, but the time that he will allow himself to eat meat, and it's not something that he like desires. He doesn't like brisket. I mean, what kind of Ashkenazi Jew doesn't like brisket? But that's a different conversation. He will eat meat on the pilgrimage holidays, on Shavuot, Pesach, and Sukkot. That is in the wrong order. But as sort of like a remembrance of the sacrifice that people brought in the temples, right? And that sort of like is a throwback to maybe how often people really ate meat.
Here's my idea, the way you were talking about, like, we're so far removed from that. Like, can you imagine if in order to buy kosher meat, you had to go to a butcher, like a kosher butcher, and it was like a membership card. And in order to get your membership card, you had to go and witness a slaughter at least once a year. Like, you had to, like, once a year remember what it was like to slaughter, like visually be there and slaughter a cow, or, or every time you buy a chicken, right, it has to actually be there. Like, we would stock butcher shops with chickens and keep them alive there, and then say, yes, here you go. You want some pulkis, you want some, boneless, it's all here, but hey, say hi to your chickens. I mean, it's a little extreme, but like, it seems like that's where we should be going towards, and to have that greater awareness. I find it interesting that, right, this comes from the Haredi culture, but not only. This comes from a very American and a very certain culture where things like this don't seem to be taboo, and they should be. But like, and I'm sure you've had this, you've had people ask you, or Phil has been asked this question of like asking to defend their vegetarianism, right? To say like, oh, but you shouldn't be, right? From a Jewish perspective or from a health perspective, and to like have to defend that. Why would, like, it feels so disgusting that that's an easily understandable question that people ask, and it should not be, right? We don't ask people to defend their religion. We don't ask people to defend so many other things. No. Why are you Jewish? No. Like, I would never, like,
fair.
But like, why are you vegetarian? It seems like It's a personal thing, right? For whatever reason. I don't have to justify why I'm vegetarian. I don't have to justify why I eat whatever else I have to eat.
Oh, I mean, that's
But, like,
interesting that you say that, because I feel like I have to defend being an Orthodox feminist all the time.
To who?
All kinds of people.
Like non-Jews?
Wait, how can you go to a shul where you don't count in a minyan?
Yeah, I can see. But that tends to be mainly, I'm guessing, more liberal Jews who are trying to like tell you that orthodoxy and feminism are incompatible. That's what it sounds like is behind that question.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we get asked about our vegetarianism all the time. Phil explains to some extent that it's, because of an ice cream emergency. And I imagine also
flesh phobia. That's
probably,
what it is.
no, but I don't think it's really about flesh phobia. I think that that's a way of like not getting into all of the other reasons, and not wanting
Fair
to be
enough.
like prescriptive or say like meat eating is really problematic. And I think also like we now know, right? Like it's a huge contributor to pollution. And I just think that it, arguably becomes less and less defensible, which doesn't mean everybody needs to be vegan tomorrow. It just means, we could all cut back and that would be good for all of us and the planet.
It's funny. 2 days ago, I had a neighbor who is the one that introduced me to some of these sellers online that do kosher meat, but from the hindquarters, where you can get certain cuts like filet mignon and other steaks and other roasts that you wouldn't otherwise get, because the kosher consumer doesn't have access to those normally, because they, for various halakhic reasons, it's hard to remove certain fats, it's hard to remove certain sinews that aren't kosher, and they don't do it. And he showed me that there's places online where you can get these with very good kosher supervision. And we had been talking like months and months ago, like we should just go in on a cow together, like find 4 people and find a shochet, which is not nearly as hard to find, and, get a butcher, just like, break it up. And now I have a freezer full of meat, which is what like American hunters do, right? When you have this hunting culture, you're going to kill a deer or 2, and you're going to, butcher those down, and you have a freezer full of meat for the next, quite a few months. And I'm like, that actually, not the hunting part, but the 5 families going in on a cow and having a freezer full of meat for the next several months seems like a much more humane and more Jewish thing to do than just going every Friday morning and seeing what's available at the grocery store.
We typically don't have salting boards in our houses anymore.
So, yeah. That is true. It is harder to learn how to salt. Kosher salt is available. It's not. No, I'm saying it is harder to do because
surgery.
It's not brain surgery. Exactly. That was literally was going to say next. And the shochet is usually very good. If you find one that's independent and is like willing to do this with you, to say, hey, yeah, we can salt this stuff together. And buying a salting board is what, $20? It's a fraction of the price of buying a cow.
I mean, you can report back. You can come back and tell us how
we'll see,
that went. And if
this was in response
to
to this fire to say like, oh my God, we're not going to have meat for the holidays. Right. Let's all go in on a cow and we'll know that the winter will be okay.
I want us to talk a little more about the permission versus mitzvah piece, right? So you named earlier the rabbinic dictum that, celebration basically requires meat and wine. Where is this idea, right? Like if it's a celebration, that means that it's exceptional. So like that's become extended, right? Like people eat a lot of meat during the week and also on Shabbat. So it's a way of elevating Shabbat. But, we've been to meals where there's 3 different kinds of meat.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
and a fish course. So there's multiple kinds of protein.
Meat,
yeah.
What do you then do for your own kid's wedding, right? Like how much? And so there's this real meat culture. And one of the sort of most compelling interpretations of after the flood and the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide commandments that are incumbent upon all of humanity, maybe, is that like you're not allowed to take a limb from a live animal. And in this sort of same sections, we see God grant people permission to eat meat that they didn't have before the flood. And so one of the readings of how the world became filled with Hamas, filled with violence before the flood, that God had to, take everything back and reset it with the flood, is that people didn't have a violent outlet before. And so they became violent among themselves, and that the permission to kill animals is that this is sort of like a concession to humanity's violent nature and like allowing it a productive outlet, that you're now allowed to kill an animal and eat it, whereas before, I guess people weren't doing that, they were killing each other instead. I think that's a really compelling read, but by no means does that suggest that you must kill animals. It's like, humans, you have a violent nature. You need to figure out a way to rein it in. That doesn't necessarily mean go to town killing animals.
I have two reads on that. One is that this heavy meat culture seems to be very America specific, and a little bit by extension by bleed over into Canada, meaning Canada doesn't really have that mentality. But because the Jewish community is so focused on what goes on in America as Canadians, there is a bit of spillover effect of that. And so this heavy meat culture, especially in the Haredi community, is a product of being in America where so much meat is available, and great, we can participate in this, right? To me, it's similar to the fact that it's very hard to really get into kosher wine because wines are harder to find, really fine, exceptional kosher wines, but it's very easy to get kosher whiskeys and kosher bourbons and kosher beers. So you find a lot of people that are into craft brews and bourbon and whiskey because here's a way to participate in the larger food culture in a way that's acceptable. So the fact that we can make kosher jerky and have tons of kosher beef and all this stuff, right, makes it, the thing that we can do. So that to me, and if you look at cultures in Europe, in Israel, in elsewhere, probably outside of Argentina, where all the meat is being made, and it's a very meat heavy culture, you don't see the Jewish communities being that meat heavy, especially because it's much more expensive. So that to me is the one read of like why we have picked up, or people have picked up on this in the Jewish community. And the other read is a lot less valorizing of the community. And you said it, you said at what you said at the end there about like how the idea that you're killing meat as a way to like tamp down your violent nature, right? My guess is that a lot of these people, maybe, I'm not pointing fingers, a lot of these people that are heavy meat eaters in the Jewish community might otherwise have some really serious violent tendencies that they need to get through with a lot of meat, right? The more meat you eat, the more tendency you're unconsciously pointing out to the world.
To move.
That's my less valorizing read.
I think now we're so removed from it. Like none of these people are going and checking these animals themselves. Almost none of them.
But there is something primal about eating meat that even if you're not thinking about the violence of it,
still bleeding. Yeah.
But just the eating something off of a bone, there's like, that is there in that culture, regardless of whether you're.
It's a sign of masculinity, right? Like it has this like masculine piece to it. I think that it gets into all kinds of complicated. I think also the idea that we're supposed to have compassion for these animals also suggests a kal v'chomer, right? Like if we're supposed to be so compassionate to these animals, all the more so to all of these other humans. And I think like because we're not actively engaged in that process, we miss all of the possible, what's the word I'm looking for? Like there's like all these lessons to be drawn out from meat consumption or not meat consumption, right? Environmental, moral, ethical, compassion. And I'm arguing also like compassion for other humans. But because we're so removed from the process, we miss all of that, right? It's just like going to the store and buying a box of cereal.
The Kli Yakar, who was a 16th century medieval commentator, has this very famous point about that, where he says that the reason why there are so many laws attached to the eating of meat is to remind you that there needs to be many steps that you can think about the compassion. You have to slaughter. You have to check this. You have to drain the blood. You have to salt. This has to be there and that has to not have a blemish. All of these things are designed to move you towards compassion. And the fact that we are so far removed from that actually feeds into exactly what you're saying.
I was glad in the reporting around this terrible fire at the AgriStar food processing plant that there was this focus on the people who live there and the 600 people who are now out of work. And that's terrible. And there was also an emphasis in some of the reporting that the new owners significantly improved employment conditions. But we also know that the former owners were, terrible violators of all kinds of laws. And meat processing plants are terrible places to work.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of the notion that kosher in general, and by extension, I guess, to a certain extent, meat in particular, is designed to separate us as a community? That like it's hard to keep kosher because we don't want people to be eating at the same places all the time as everybody else and doing everything. Meaning it's not that you're not allowed to eat where non-Jews are present. You go to Wrigley Field, there's a kosher hot dog stand. In Toronto at the Blue Jays games, there's kosher hot dogs. And the COR doesn't say you're not allowed to eat these at the game because you're eating with non-Jews. It's not about that, but it's about adding layers of separation between, us and them, so to speak, whoever them might be, in order to maintain a certain amount of in-group nature. And I think kosher meat actually does that more than so many other types of foodstuffs.
I think for people who are committed to a halachic framework, it requires depth of halachic knowledge, and there's a real barrier there. My experience of learning about kashrut, like there's the joke in rabbinical school is when you learn Hilchot Kashrut, you basically learn that you've been crazy, unnecessarily strict your entire life. And there's like a lot of food that you can eat that you had no idea was really like letter of the law fine. But when you learn the laws of Shabbat, you learn that like you never have and probably never will really keep Shabbat in your life. Yeah?
Yeah. Yes, I agree 100% with that sentiment.
So I think that, like all things, halakha is there to, I don't want to say put up a boundary, but like establish something, right? Like if you are eating a bowl of cereal with milk and your daughter is eating a deli sandwich across the table from you, right? Like you put something between you to remind you that like there's a boundary here. And I think in a lot of ways, like our food ways are to do that also. This law was super interesting to me when I learned it. If I have a non-Jewish neighbor over for Shabbat, if they bring me store-bought cookies, like with the hechsher, maybe even without a hechsher, perfectly fine. I can serve them. If they made those cookies for me in their kitchen, I'm not supposed to eat them or serve them. And I was in this situation because like they made them for me, right? Like that's socially much more intimate, right? Like I can have them over into my house as a guest. They're not supposed to make me something, right? And like that is uncomfortable and intentionally so. And I think that, not drinking with non-Jews, not drinking their wine. I think there's a lot of logic built into that system. And it's there, again, to raise intentionality and awareness, right? It's like the halachic man. It's the prism through which you, see and go about the world.
Yeah, there was a passage in the, what was it called again? How to Run a Traditional Jewish Household, Blue Greenberg's famous book that she wrote decades and decades ago, where she was talking about kosher. And she writes, it's very easy to keep kosher if you're out with friends at a non-kosher restaurant. Just go to ask the waiter to tell the chef to take a piece of fish and to wrap it in foil and to bake it like that and to serve it to you with some fresh vegetables. And first of all, as somebody who has worked in restaurants, a long time ago, and is very familiar with restaurants, I think that if you went to a chef and you asked for that, they throw you out, or they would say, sorry, we don't do that. So that's the first thing. And I'm like, even if they were to honor that, I think you are absolutely missing the point of what it means to keep kosher, which is have them at a kosher restaurant, and that adds a barrier. Don't say, I'm going to come eat with you at a non-kosher restaurant, in some way. And then I'm like, it's so easy to eat at a non-kosher restaurant if you're at the non-Jewish. And I was like, that misses the point, and that was wrong. And I felt like so icked out by that.
I don't agree at all. I think that
go ahead. Tell me.
I think that, the person who cares about kashrut out with non-Jewish friends in a non-Jewish context, it is uncomfortable and squirmy. So if you're going to order food, like, be uncomfortable.
No, and I'm saying you shouldn't order food.
Right. So,
right.
Okay. So like 6 to 1. So
the thing that people do, and I know this because I have prepared those meals years and years ago, but I've seen that they're available now, is if you go to a non-kosher restaurant, they will often have a contracted kosher caterer that will make a meal that is double wrapped and that they'll be able to serve to you. And that to me is a much bigger barrier, because it's not like you're eating like everybody else. It's so obvious that you're unwrapping this foil and all of this tape, and you're making this like big pile of garbage next to you.
Yes.
That to me is the barrier to like going to have a work meeting at a non-kosher restaurant.
Yes. No, I had that in a work context, and it was for a few days. And besides for the fact that like environmentally, like the plastic everything and the double wrapped and the disposable was like horrifying to me. It was just like, it was hard, and it was frankly embarrassing. I am glad that that doesn't happen anymore. But tell me, Avi, tachlis, how like if you know, the projections are correct and the price of kosher meat skyrockets from now until the end of the Chagim, how will that affect the way that you guys have Yontif?
Provided I don't get my, you know, fifth of a cow in time to not
Is
have
that
to
your
worry about it.
plan?
I'm saying,
Is that
it's an open plan so far, but supposing, yes, that's too difficult and it's complicated, whatever, I probably would serve a lot less meat. I don't have a hard time serving, you know, vegetarian dishes and vegetarians. I don't think that I'm going to switch necessarily to like tofu and seitan and, you know, just make the usual dishes, but make them like that. I would just switch to a much more vegetable heavy set of dishes that can all be served and have protein in the aggregate, you know, in that sort of way. I'm not too worried about it. I would probably serve some meat, but much smaller, in a much smaller way, meaning like get whatever meat I can, turn it into a stew, and where the meat isn't necessarily the highlight of the stew or like the main part of the stew, but it's just there, and find places where I could stretch it and say, yes, we have meat here, but it's not clearly the focus of our meal, partially because it's expensive and partially because, hey, you know what? Here's a way for me to think about that. So I will report back as the cooking commences. Well, Yedida, how about you? I mean, you said you're vegetarian. You don't necessarily eat meat. Do you think that this is going to affect your Rosh Hashanah cooking, your Sukkot cooking? How's this going to affect your family?
So we are actually going to Pearlstone for Rosh Hashanah, so I will not be cooking, and I don't cook on Yom Kippur anyway, so I'm not so worried about that. But, you know, I recognize 100% that like this is going to be hard for a lot of people, but I hope that they will get creative. The AIs are really wonderful at suggesting how to restructure meals and meal planning. And maybe this will lead to people eating less meat, which could be good for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's move on to textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing. Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Parashat Re'eh. Yedida, what do you got for us in Parashat Re'eh?
Well, this was my stepson's bar mitzvah parsha, so I actually don't know how to lean, but I found myself at Mincha on Shabbat sort of humming along, so that was nice. So here we are, we're entering the long section of the laws in Deuteronomy 12 to 26. Towards the beginning, there's a huge amount of emphasis on, surprise, surprise, the Israelites behaving differently in the land from their other God-worshipping Canaanite neighbors. And Torah makes a big deal out of this at the beginning, and it says, you must destroy all of the sites at which the nations you are to dispossess worshipped their gods. So all the sites of any kind of other godly worship must be destroyed on lofty mountains or beautiful hills. All of it needs to come down. Tear down their altars, smash their pillars, put their sacred posts to the fire, and cut down the images of their gods, obliterating their name from that site. And here's the verse I'm really going to talk about. Do not worship the Lord your God in like manner. So there are a number of different interpretations of this verse. It's Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 4. So one is that Israelites will not sacrifice to God all over the land, right? That they're going to do it only in this one central place in Jerusalem. Another reason why people would have eaten less meat. This gets into all kinds of other biblical questions, but not for now. And then another teaching that's derived from this verse is that it is a warning against wiping out God's name, right? This is the idea of like never erasing God's name, and that this verse serves as a warning. And so like there are all kinds of interesting questions about, well, what if God's name is, written in Sharpie on your body and it's going to come off? So questions like that. And here's my favorite midrash on this verse, that Rabbi Ishmael raises the question, like, do you really think that Israelites are going to destroy the places of proper God worship, right? Like reading the verse saying that like Israelites need to be told not to destroy proper places of worship. And what he says instead is rather Israelites should not behave like the Canaanites and through their sins cause the places of worship to be destroyed, right? So this gets to sort of the Deuteronomic quid pro quo, right? Like if you keep the commandments, everything will be good. But if you don't keep the commandments and you sin, then things will be bad. And so what Rabbi Ishmael is saying here is the real meaning of this verse is Israel, you must behave so that you do not cause places of worship to be destroyed. And I like that midrash.
Yeah, I like it too. I'm going to go Talmudic this time. There's a very interesting verse at the beginning of Perek Yudalad at 14 that says, "Banim atem laHashem Elokechem, lo titgodedu v'lo tasimu karcha beineinechem lameis." It's about the separating yourself from the community, but also not doing things that were the practices of pagan people at the time. And this notion that like you are children of God makes for an interesting argument in the Talmud. In Kiddushin, there's an argument, I don't know if you've heard this one before, but there's an argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda that who does this apply to? This idea that like you're not allowed to, well, the halachic question is, who does this apply to that you're not allowed to like shave your head in the way that like whatever. And so Rabbi Yehuda says that it's only the people that behave as the children of God, right? Bani matem, you are my children. If you listen to God's words, right? If you are a faithful believer and you actually listen to God's words, then then you are included in this, verse and in the commandment and being part of this thing. And Rabbi Meir goes and says, no, all people are considered the children of God. And even if you don't, right, even if you rebel, you're still a child, right? My kid who doesn't listen to me is still my child, and therefore the halacha should still apply to them and the verse should still apply to them. And I think it's a really nice, interesting thing. And generally, in an argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, who wins the argument in the Talmud?
Rabbi Yehuda.
Yes, except in this case, Rabbi Meir actually wins. The Torah Tamima has an interesting comment on this verse that goes and says that Rabbi Yehuda actually eventually embraced the view of Rabbi Meir, that he realized that, even children that don't listen to their parents are actually they're still your kids.
Yes. Yes, they are.
Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.